Minister, you'll know my long-time opposition to this scheme. I recall back in the day when it was first introduced, we had our colleague here, Deputy Burton at the time, insisting that this was linked to jobs. When it wasn't linked to jobs, that became very evident. It was a way of trying to introduce a very lucrative tax incentive, tax reduction for high-income earners that weren't already in the state. And remember, we're talking about a 30% reduction in the calculation of the earnings above €75,000 that would be exempt from tax in this regard. To add insult to injury, what you did in Budget 2015, what your government did at the time, was to be led by the nose by the accountants, because that's where this came from. This didn't come from Minister Noonan. It didn't come from the Department of Finance. It came, as we were hearing, from the accountants to say, let's increase the threshold, let's expand this. This will result in huge amounts of jobs. And you threw caution to the wind, and you let no cap in whatsoever. And today, what you're doing, and we welcome the fact that you're at least doing this, is that you are recognising the folly of your mistake and reverting back to insert a cap in the legislation. However, I do think, and my colleague has made this point, that this scheme, in my view, should be abolished. But I do think there is an onus on you to explain how the €1 million figure has arrived at. Where is the evidence to suggest that the €1 million figure is the appropriate amount? And can you explain, can you just put on the record in black and white the amount of income that can be disregarded for tax purposes now up to that level? Can you also tell us what has been the benefit of this? What real analysis has been done? I've looked at the forms that had to be filled in by the companies in terms of their employees to avail of this here, and there's no doubt about it that there could be gaming the system going on here, because this is a lucrative tax relief for very high income earners in this state, and you know, it comes at the time, and let me say this, and I welcome the fact that the flat rate expenses have been deferred, but that's all it is. It's a deferral. It's a deferral, and it's a deferral because, as you've said clearly to me in the parliamentary question, that you want to have this taken effect with all other abolition or restructuring of the flat rate taxes. So people, whether they're nurses, whether they're members of our defence forces, whether they're teachers, will now be looking very closely at what is in store for them in terms of flat rate expenses. And when we're talking about that level of allowance compared to what the SARP is, which allows for incomes above €75,000, for that portion of income up to €1 million now to be disregarded, this falls into the halfpenny place. But yet, you know, this is, and again, this speaks to the priorities of this government. It is, as I said, I welcome the fact that you're recognising the folly of the mistake in expanding this scheme, although you haven't restricted it, but also of abolishing the cap. And let me say this again: we warned you of this. We warned you. Like, who does this? Seriously, who listens to the big accountancy firms? Who listens to, without evidence to suggest that this is the case, and who allows for an unlimited scheme to operate in this way, thinking that in some way it wouldn't impact? But the problem here is that government's view is that when it comes to high earners, when it comes to the super wealthy, that the finance bill will always be there to assist them. And, you know, as I said, while this is an improvement, it still allows for a huge reduction in tax for certain employees who are now within the state and who will take up employment in the next 2 years, something that is not available to people who are already here and in employment. So I think that those questions need to be answered, and as I said, while I welcome the fact that there is a restriction being placed on it, this scheme in its entirety should be abolished.
And finally,